On an autumn afternoon in 2007, an 8-year-old boy named Jordan Carter vanished from his street in the small town of Maple Creek. He had ridden his red bicycle just a few houses down to deliver freshly baked cookies to an elderly neighbor, a simple act of kindness that ended in an incomprehensible void. For 15 years, his disappearance remained a haunting mystery, a wound that refused to close for his family and the community that searched for him. The case went cold, buried under the weight of time and unanswered questions. Then, in 2022, a chance discovery during a home renovation unearthed an old, corroded security camera hidden within a wall. On its damaged memory card, forensic specialists found a single grainy piece of footage that revealed the horrifying truth, proving that the monster had been hiding in plain sight all along. Before we get into the story, drop a comment with your country and the time right now. Jordan Carter was a boy made of sunshine and quiet observation. At 8 years old, he navigated the world with a gentle curiosity that drew people to him. He was not loud or boisterous, but possessed an inner light that shone through his wide, thoughtful eyes. His hair was the color of wheat, and in the summer, the sun would leave a constellation of freckles across his nose and cheeks. He was the only child of Sarah and Tom Carter, and he was the quiet, steady center of their world. He loved the precise, ordered universe of building blocks, creating elaborate cities that sprawled across the living room floor. He also loved the chaotic, colorful world of superhero comics, spending hours drawing his own characters with meticulous detail, giving them elaborate backstories and noble quests. His kindness was not a performance. It was an innate part of his being. He was the child who would stop to help a younger student who had dropped their books, the one who left dandelions on the doorstep of the elderly woman next door because he heard her say they were her favorite. His mother, Sarah, nurtured this empathy. She taught him to bake, and their kitchen often filled with the warm, sweet smell of chocolate chip cookies. It was their shared ritual, a messy, joyful collaboration of flour and sugar. Jordan took immense pride in their creations, especially in the act of giving them away. He saw the cookies not just as a treat, but as a way to deliver a small piece of happiness. That particular week in early October 2007, Sarah and Jordan had baked 24 cookies, their largest batch yet. They were for Mr. Finch, the old man who lived 4 houses down. Arthur Finch was a fixture in the neighborhood, a quiet widower who spent most of his days tending his immaculate rose bushes. He had lived in the same small house for over 50 years, and the children on the street regarded him with a mixture of respect and mild apprehension, the way children often view the very old. Jordan, however, was not afraid. He saw Mr. Finch as someone who might be lonely, and he was determined to share their cookies with him. Sarah agreed it was a lovely idea. Maple Creek was the kind of town that prided itself on its safety. It was a community nestled among rolling hills and dense forests, a place where people left their doors unlocked and children played outside until the streetlights flickered on. The autumn of 2007 was particularly beautiful. The air was crisp and carried the scent of wood smoke and decaying leaves. A canopy of red and gold hung over the streets, and the sunlight slanted through the branches, casting long, dancing shadows on the pavement. It was a town that felt insulated from the harsh realities of the outside world, a perfect backdrop for childhood. The houses on Jordan Street were modest and well kept, with manicured lawns and cheerful flower beds. It was a portrait of suburban tranquility. No one felt this sense of security more deeply than the Carters. They had moved to Maple Creek specifically to raise a family, to give their son a life free from the anxieties of the city. They knew their neighbors by name. They participated in community potlucks and holiday parades. The street was an extension of their own backyard, a safe and predictable environment where the greatest danger seemed to be a scraped knee from a bicycle fall. This deeply ingrained belief in their own safety was what made the events of that afternoon so fundamentally shattering. It did not just steal their son, it stole their world. The afternoon was cool but bright. Jordan put on his favorite blue windbreaker, the one with the superhero patch on the sleeve that he had insisted Sarah sew on. He carefully placed a plate of 6 cookies covered in plastic wrap into the front basket of his bicycle. It was a brilliant red bike, a birthday present from the year before, and he kept it polished and clean. Sarah stood on the porch and watched him. She reminded him to come straight back home after he dropped them off. He promised he would. He gave her a quick wave, his face serious with the importance of his mission, and then he was off, his small legs pedaling steadily down the familiar sidewalk. Sarah watched until he turned the gentle curve in the street and disappeared from view. It was the last time she would ever see him. She went back inside, the pleasant silence of the house settling around her. She started on some chores, glanced at the clock, and noted the time. The trip should have taken him no more than 10 minutes round trip, 15 at the most if he stopped to talk. When 20 minutes had passed, a small, quiet hum of unease began in the back of her mind. It was a feeling she dismissed at first. He was probably just talking to Mr. Finch. The old man was lonely. Perhaps he had invited Jordan in for a glass of milk. Still, she walked to the front window and peered down the street. Nothing. Another 10 minutes crawled by. The hum of unease grew into a low, insistent thrum of anxiety. This was not like Jordan. He was a rule follower, a boy who took promises seriously. He had said he would come straight back. Sarah grabbed a light sweater and stepped outside. The air had grown colder, the sun now lower in the sky, and the shadows were deeper. She walked down the street, her pace quickening with each step. The neighborhood was quiet, the only sound the rustle of leaves skittering across the pavement. As she approached Arthur Finch's house, she saw it. Jordan's red bicycle. It was parked neatly by the curb, its kickstand down, standing perfectly upright, as if he had just placed it there. But there was no sign of Jordan. She walked up to the front door and saw the plate of cookies sitting on the welcome mat, still covered in plastic wrap. They had never been taken inside. A cold dread, sharp and suffocating, seized her. He had made it here, but he had never delivered the cookies, and he had not taken his bike. She knocked on Mr. Finch's door, a frantic hammering sound. After a moment the door opened, and the old man stood there, looking slightly confused. Sarah asked him if he had seen Jordan. Arthur Finch told her a simple, devastating story. He said he had seen the boy arrive and place the cookies on the porch. Before he could get to the door to thank him, he saw Jordan get back on his bike and ride away, heading further down the street, away from his own home. He had assumed the boy was going to visit another friend. Sarah's world tilted on its axis. Why would he leave the cookies? Why would he ride in the wrong direction? Nothing made sense. The cold dread turned into pure, unadulterated panic. He was gone. The first police car arrived within minutes, its siren silent but its flashing lights painting the tranquil street in strokes of red and blue. The calm of the autumn afternoon was shattered. Neighbors began to emerge from their houses, their faces etched with confusion and concern. The initial response was handled by a patrol officer who took Sarah's frantic statement, his professional calm doing little to soothe her terror. He called for detectives. The scene itself was unnervingly clean. There was the bicycle parked perfectly. There was the plate of cookies untouched. There were no signs of a struggle, no dropped items, no scuff marks on the pavement. It was as if Jordan Carter had simply evaporated into the crisp autumn air. Detective David Miller arrived as dusk began to settle over Maple Creek. Miller was a veteran of the police force, a man with weary eyes and a quiet, methodical demeanor. He had spent 25 years investigating the worst moments of people's lives, but the disappearance of a child was a special kind of dread. He approached the scene with a heavy heart, taking in the small red bike that looked so horribly out of place against the backdrop of a burgeoning crime scene. He spoke with Sarah first, his voice gentle. She recounted the afternoon's events through ragged sobs. Her husband Tom, now by her side, his arm wrapped tightly around her, his face a mask of disbelief. Miller's next interview was with the only witness, Arthur Finch. The detective found the old man sitting in his dimly lit living room, a cup of tea trembling in his hand. Finch repeated the story he had told Sarah. He described seeing Jordan through his front window. He said the boy had carefully placed the cookies on the mat, then immediately turned around, got on his bike, and pedaled off down the block in the opposite direction of his home. Finch told the detective he had assumed Jordan was going to a friend's house and thought nothing more of it until Sarah came knocking on his door in a panic. He seemed genuinely distressed, his voice frail and shaky. He offered his full cooperation, expressing deep sorrow for the Carter family. His story, while strange, was the only piece of information they had. It set the initial direction of the search, away from Finch's house, further into the neighborhood and towards the woods that bordered the edge of town. As night fell, the community response was immediate and overwhelming. Word spread through phone calls and frantic knocks on doors. Within an hour, hundreds of Maple Creek residents had gathered at the local elementary school, which had become an impromptu command center. They were armed with flashlights and determination, their faces grim. They were parents, teachers, and neighbors, all united by a single terrifying thought. It could have been their child. They fanned out in organized search parties, combing through backyards, parks, and the dense, dark woods that surrounded the town. Their lights cut through the blackness, and their voices called out Jordan's name, the sound echoing through the cold night air. The media arrived soon after, their satellite trucks lining the streets and casting a harsh, artificial glare on the unfolding tragedy. The story of the missing 8-year-old in the idyllic town was compelling, and soon Jordan's smiling school picture was on every local news channel and would soon be on national broadcasts. The intense media spotlight brought more resources and volunteers, but it also added a layer of surreal chaos to the family's private nightmare. The Carters were besieged, their grief put on public display. Detective Miller and his team worked tirelessly, chasing down every lead, no matter how small. They re-interviewed Arthur Finch, who never wavered in his account. His story was consistent, and his demeanor was that of a concerned, elderly neighbor. He was quickly ruled out as a person of interest. The investigation focused on two primary theories: that Jordan had wandered off and gotten lost, or that he had been the victim of a stranger abduction. The first theory seemed less likely with each passing hour. Jordan was a responsible boy, not known for wandering. The second theory was terrifying. Police canvassed the entire town, asking if anyone had seen any unfamiliar vehicles or suspicious individuals. Several leads surfaced in the first few days, each one a small spark of hope that was quickly extinguished. A gas station attendant in a neighboring town reported seeing a boy who matched Jordan's description in a blue sedan, but security footage proved it was a different child. A local man with a minor criminal record was questioned extensively but had a solid alibi. The search parties found a small discarded blue windbreaker in the woods, but it was not Jordan's. Each dead end was another blow to the family and to the investigators. The days bled into a week, and the organized searches began to dwindle. The media presence lessened. The gnawing, terrible silence of no news began to set in. The investigation had hit a wall. The first year after Jordan's disappearance was a blur of raw, unceasing pain for the Carter family. Time, which is meant to heal, became their tormentor. Each passing day a confirmation of his absence. Anniversaries were agonizing milestones. His 9th birthday arrived in the spring, and Sarah baked his favorite cake, a chocolate one with vanilla frosting. She and Tom sat at their kitchen table and stared at the unlit candles, the silence in the house, a deafening roar. They donated the cake to a local shelter, unable to bear the sight of it. The first Christmas was a landscape of grief. The space under the tree where his presence should have been a gaping hole in their lives. The yellow ribbons that had adorned the trees and lampposts of Maple Creek began to fade under the sun and fray in the wind. The vibrant symbols of hope slowly transformed into tattered reminders of a tragedy that the town was beginning to absorb into its history. The initial flood of media attention receded to a trickle, then to a brief, somber mention on the local news on the anniversary of his disappearance. The nation's attention moved on to other stories, other tragedies. But for the Carters, there was no moving on. They were frozen in that October afternoon, forever waiting for their son to come home. The strain of their unresolved grief began to erode the foundation of Sarah and Tom's marriage. They grieved in different ways. Tom threw himself into his work, seeking refuge in long hours and exhaustion, a desperate attempt to outrun his thoughts. Sarah, however, could not look away. She became a tireless advocate for her son, refusing to let his memory fade. She plastered missing person flyers in every town within a 100-mile radius. She hounded the police department for updates, her calls becoming a familiar, painful ritual for the detectives. Their different ways of coping created a chasm between them, a space filled with unspoken resentments and shared sorrow that was too heavy to carry together. They loved each other, but their grief had become a third person in their marriage, one who demanded all their attention. For Detective Miller, the Jordan Carter case became the ghost in his office. The case file, a thick binder filled with hundreds of pages of dead-end leads, witness statements, and fruitless search grids, sat on the corner of his desk. It was a monument to his failure. He would often find himself flipping through it late at night, rereading Finch's statement, studying the maps of the search areas, looking for the one thing he must have missed. The clean, simple nature of the disappearance haunted him. There was no evidence, no ransom note, no witnesses besides the elderly man. It was a perfect crime or a perfect tragedy, and he did not know which was worse. As the years passed and he neared retirement, the unsolved case weighed on him more heavily. He had brought closure to dozens of families over his career, but for the Carters, he had nothing. It was a professional and personal failing that he would carry with him long after he turned in his badge. The family's life settled into a strange, painful limbo. Sarah channeled her relentless energy into creating something positive from her pain. She started the Jordan Carter Foundation, a small local organization dedicated to helping families of missing children. It gave her a purpose, a way to fight back against the helplessness that threatened to consume her. She became a source of comfort and strength for others who were navigating the same agonizing uncertainty. Tom supported her work from a distance, proud of her strength but unable to participate directly. The foundation was a constant reminder of what he had lost. A few years after the 10-year anniversary of Jordan's disappearance, they made the difficult decision to separate. Their love had not died, but it had been irrevocably broken by the loss of their son. They remained friends, forever connected by their shared tragedy, but they could no longer live under the same roof as the ghosts of their past. Maple Creek healed, as communities do. New families moved in, children were born, and the sharp edges of the town's collective trauma softened over time. The story of the missing boy became a local legend, a cautionary tale whispered among parents. For the Carters, however, and for Detective Miller, the silence was never peace. It was just the long, drawn-out absence of an answer. It was a question mark that hung over every holiday, every birthday, every changing season. It was the quiet, agonizing wait for a resolution that seemed like it would never come. 15 years after Jordan Carter disappeared, the world had changed in countless ways. Technology had evolved, and the methods of police investigation had transformed alongside it. In 2022, the Maple Creek Police Department's cold case unit was under the command of a new detective, Maya Evans. Evans was sharp, methodical, and possessed a deep belief that no case was truly unsolvable. She was too young to have been on the force in 2007, so she approached the Jordan Carter file without the baggage of past failures. She saw it not as a ghost, but as a puzzle that was missing a piece. She decided to begin a full review, starting from page 1 of the binder that had once sat on Detective Miller's desk. Evans and her small team explored the possibility of applying modern forensic techniques. They discussed genealogical DNA, a tool that had cracked dozens of cold cases across the country. But the Jordan Carter case had a fundamental problem. There was no crime scene, and therefore no DNA evidence to test. No blood, no hair, no fibers had ever been recovered. The only physical items were the bicycle and the plate of cookies, both of which had been handled by dozens of people in the initial chaos and were of no forensic value. They re-interviewed some of the original neighbors, but after 15 years, memories had faded and become unreliable. The review was a slow, frustrating process of treading old ground, hoping to find a single thread that had been overlooked. The catalyst for the breakthrough came not from a brilliant piece of detective work or a new scientific method, but from the simple, mundane act of a real estate transaction. Arthur Finch had passed away peacefully in his sleep several years prior at the age of 92. His house, which had sat empty for a time, was finally sold to a young couple eager to renovate the dated property. In the late summer of 2022, they hired a construction crew to begin the work. Their plans included tearing down a non-load-bearing wall in the small den to create a more open living space. A young construction worker was pulling down sections of drywall when his crowbar hit something hard and unusual embedded within the wall cavity. He reached into the dusty space between the studs and pulled out a small, boxy object. It was an old security camera, the kind that was popular in the early 2000s. It was covered in rust and drywall dust, its lens clouded over. The worker, thinking it was just a piece of old junk, was about to toss it into the debris pile, but something made him pause. He showed it to the new homeowner, who had grown up in Maple Creek and knew the story of the boy who had vanished from that very street. The homeowner felt a chill run down his spine. He remembered that Arthur Finch had been the one to report seeing Jordan right away. On a hunch, he called the police department. The call was routed to Detective Evans. She felt a jolt of electricity, the first real surge of possibility she had felt on this case. A camera, hidden inside a wall of the only witness's house, was too significant to be a coincidence. She drove to the house herself and took possession of the old device, handling it as if it were a priceless artifact. It was the first new piece of evidence in the Jordan Carter case in 15 years. The hope was fragile, but it was real. The camera was sent immediately to the state's digital forensics lab. The exterior was in poor condition, damaged by time and moisture. The real prize, if there was one, lay inside a small SD memory card. The lab technicians were cautious. The card was corroded, and a clumsy attempt to access the data could erase it forever. They worked for weeks, using specialized equipment and painstaking techniques to clean the contacts and stabilize the card. They painstakingly reconstructed the damaged file system, sector by sector. For a long time, it seemed like the effort would be fruitless. The data was too degraded. But then they found it, a single corrupted video file. They spent another week repairing the file until it was playable. Detective Evans gathered her team in a small, darkened room at the station. The lead forensic technician was there, along with a few other detectives who had become invested in the case. There was a palpable tension in the air. The technician hit play. The video flickered to life. The footage was grainy, the color washed out, and there was no audio. A time and date stamp in the corner read OCT 12-2007. The camera's perspective was from an upstairs window looking down on the street. It was Arthur Finch's house. They watched as a small figure on a red bicycle came into frame. It was Jordan Carter. He rode up to the house, dismounted, and carefully placed the plate of cookies on the front porch. Then he turned, as if to leave. But before he could get back on his bike, the front door of the house opened. Arthur Finch appeared in the doorway. He was not the frail, confused old man he had seemed to be. He looked composed, intentional. He beckoned to Jordan. The boy hesitated for a moment, then walked towards the open door. Finch put a hand on his shoulder and guided him inside. The door closed. A few seconds later, the camera's view shuddered and tilted downwards, as if it had been bumped. And then the recording ended. The room was utterly silent. The detectives stared at the frozen image on the screen, the empty porch where a boy had just been standing. The truth was horrifyingly simple. Arthur Finch's story had been a lie from the very beginning. He had not seen Jordan ride away. He had lured him into his house. He was not a witness. He was the perpetrator. The man who had appeared to be a kindly, concerned neighbor, the one who had sent the entire search in the wrong direction, was the monster they had been looking for all along. Since Arthur Finch was dead, there could be no confession, no interrogation where he would be forced to confront his crime. The silent testimony of the video was all they had, but it was enough to rewrite the entire history of the case. Detective Evans and her team immediately secured a warrant to conduct a thorough search of the Finch property, which was now an active crime scene. The renovation was halted, and forensic teams descended on the small, unassuming house. They were no longer looking for clues about a disappearance. They were looking for the remains of a little boy. They searched the house from top to bottom, using ground-penetrating radar and forensic dogs. The initial search of the house and yard yielded nothing. The team's attention then turned to the basement. It was a damp, musty space with a concrete floor. In one corner, they noticed a small section of the floor that was a slightly different color and texture from the rest. It looked newer, as if it had been poured long after the original foundation. The radar confirmed an anomaly beneath the surface. With heavy hearts, they brought in jackhammers. As they broke through the concrete, they found disturbed soil underneath. They began to dig carefully, painstakingly removing the earth by hand. A few feet down, they found a small bundle wrapped in a thick plastic tarp. A senior forensics officer gently cut the wrapping away. Inside were the skeletal remains of a small child. A piece of faded blue fabric, a windbreaker, was still partially intact. On the sleeve was a small hand-sewn superhero patch. There was no doubt. After 15 years of searching, they had found Jordan Carter. The discovery was a moment of profound sadness and grim vindication. Dental records would later provide a definitive confirmation, but everyone in that basement already knew the truth. The news of the discovery sent a shockwave through Maple Creek. The police chief held a press conference with Detective Evans standing stoically by his side. He announced that the Jordan Carter case had been solved. He named Arthur Finch, the quiet, rose-tending neighbor, as the person responsible for the boy's abduction and murder. The community reacted with a collective gasp of disbelief and horror. How could this be possible? Finch had been a part of their town's fabric for decades. He was the man who gave out hard candies on Halloween, the one who waved from his porch. The idea that such a monstrous secret had been hidden behind such a benign facade was almost impossible to comprehend. The town's sense of safety, which had been fractured in 2007, was now completely shattered. The monster had not been a stranger passing through, he had been one of their own. The most difficult task fell to Detective Evans. She felt it was her duty to deliver the news to Jordan's family in person. She also knew there was someone else who needed to be there. She called retired Detective David Miller. Miller, now in his late 60s, was overcome with emotion when Evans told him what they had found. He agreed to accompany her. Together they drove to Sarah Carter's home. She had never moved, still living in the house where she had last seen her son. When she opened the door and saw the two detectives, she knew. Her face, which had been etched with a hopeful weariness for 15 years, seemed to crumble. They sat in her living room, the same room where Jordan had once built his block cities, and Evans gently explained what they had found. She told her about the camera, the video, and the discovery in the basement. She told Sarah that her son was finally coming home. Sarah listened in silence, tears streaming down her face. It was a moment of impossible contradictions. The news brought the end of a torturous, unending hope for his safe return, a hope she had clung to for so long. But it also brought the end of uncertainty, the end of the not knowing that had been its own special kind of hell. It was a devastating truth, but it was the truth. Tom arrived shortly after, and the two parents, long separated by their grief, clung to each other, united once again in their shared, now finalized, loss. With the perpetrator dead, there would be no trial, no day in court where the family could confront the man who had destroyed their lives. The legal resolution was quiet and administrative. The district attorney officially closed the case, issuing a statement that named Arthur Finch as the sole suspect and detailed the evidence that confirmed his guilt. The investigation into Finch's past revealed no other crimes, but it painted a picture of a deeply disturbed and isolated individual who had hidden his darkness from the world. The official act of closing the case was a formality, but for the family, the return of Jordan's remains was the true final chapter. They were finally able to lay their son to rest. The community of Maple Creek mourned anew. They held a candlelight vigil in the town square, not just for Jordan, but for their own lost innocence. The story of what happened forced a painful reckoning. Neighbors shared stories they had long forgotten or dismissed about Arthur Finch. His reclusiveness, his odd, intense stare, his lack of any friends or family. In hindsight, they saw a pattern of isolation, but at the time, they had simply seen an old man who kept to himself. The realization that the evil they feared from the outside world had been living quietly among them was a difficult truth to accept. The town had to learn to heal, not from a random act of violence, but from a profound and intimate betrayal. Arthur Finch's fate was a chilling footnote to the story. He had lived for more than a decade after murdering a child, dying of natural causes in his own bed, just a few doors down from the family he had shattered. He had tended his roses, collected his mail, and lived a life of quiet routine, all while harboring the most horrific secret. He never faced a jury or a judge. His punishment was never meted out by the justice system. The only solace was that he could do no more harm. His house, the site of the crime, was eventually torn down. An empty lot now stands where it once was, a small grassy scar on the otherwise pristine street. In the years that followed the discovery, Sarah Carter found a new, quieter kind of purpose. The finality of knowing what happened to Jordan allowed her to transform her grief. The Jordan Carter Foundation, which she had started in a desperate search for meaning, grew into a nationally recognized organization. She became a powerful voice for the families of the missing, offering them the unique comfort of someone who had walked through the same fire. She spoke not of vengeance but of resilience and the enduring power of memory. Jordan's legacy would not be defined by his last day, but by the countless children who were found and the families who were supported because of the work done in his name. The town of Maple Creek never fully regained the sense of perfect safety it once had. The story became a permanent part of its identity, a reminder that darkness can exist in the most familiar of places. The autumn leaves still fall each year, carpeting the streets in red and gold, but for those who remember, the crisp air will always carry a faint echo of a tragedy. Justice, when it finally arrived, came not with the loud crack of a gavel, but with the silent, grainy flicker of a forgotten video file. It was a testament to the stubborn persistence of truth and to a mother's love that refused to let her son be forgotten. The memory of a kind little boy on a red bicycle, on a mission to deliver happiness, endured. It was a light that even the deepest darkness could not extinguish.